Hi everyone, and welcome to All Rucked Up, the podcast by injured rugby players, all about rugby and life in general. We hope to give a different perspective on the game and, our views on the world. So I've introduced myself. I'm Max, but I introduced myself in the last podcast. So if you want to get a full introduction, please go back and listen to our first one. The same with Paul, if you want to give us a wave. But yeah, he also introduced himself at the last podcast. As I say, at some point we will actually do a sort of more in-depth podcast about ourselves and our stories. But yeah, for now we're going to talk a bit about rugby. But we have got a new guest today, one of our hopefully regulars, Ross, and I'm going to give him a bit of time to say who he is and what he's about.
Cool, thank you, Max. I'm Ross. I broke my neck when I was 16 playing rugby. Following that, I went on to play wheelchair rugby for Great Britain for 16 years. Represented Great Britain in the Athens, Beijing, and London Paralympics. Retired in 2016. I now do a little bit of coaching in wheelchair rugby, so I coach for Finland. And I also work as a personal trainer. And of course, I'm a very keen rugby fan, particularly Harlequins.
Yeah, Ross is one of our more experienced rugby players, I guess. Injured rugby players, the more famous ones.
I don't
But
know
yeah,
about
he's
famous, but notorious.
notorious. Yeah, that's probably a good word, actually.
Notorious, yeah.
But yeah, I think at some point I'd really love to do an episode about wheelchair rugby and the transition as you
For sure.
found from rugby to wheelchair rugby, because very different games, but obviously a big link and really interesting to go into.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be fun. It would be fun to explore that because it was a big part of my sort of recovering from my injury.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, look out for that one, and yeah, we'll do that hopefully quite soon. But today we've got some big topics at international level to talk about. So firstly, we've got to talk about Eddie Jones and Steve Borthwick. Big news coming up about a week ago now. Frankly, I was surprised. Like, I did not think the RFU had it in them to actually make that call. Um, I, for one, am quite happy about it. But I don't know what you think about it, Ross.
Um, I'm torn on this one. I think you you're really close to a World Cup. You're 9 months out from a World Cup, so you run the risk of changing your coach, changing your style. That there's an element of that to it. But on the flip side, if you look at a 4 year cycle, um, Eddie's results are skewed by the first 2 years. We had, that 18 run win streaks, final of the 2019 World Cup. Then we've had 2 lean years. Poor Six Nations results. We've had 2 good tours of Australia, but the rugby hasn't really set the standard. And if you think about where you want to be in an ideal sort of 4 year cycle, we're not there. And I think as well, the challenge that England rugby faces, you can't plan in 4 years. The crowd, the public, people want results. They want the good Six Nations. They want to see a team in the mix, throwing it down. And looking at what I'd call the form teams this year, so Ireland, France, potentially South Africa as well in that mix, we're not there. And the question is, could Eddie Jones have taken us to that World Cup and succeeded? And I don't think that was the case. And I think that's what the RFU came to the conclusion of. Could well be wrong, but that's the choice in front of you.
What do you think, Paul?
I think it was a big decision to get rid of your coach 9 months before a World Cup because you are looking for consistency. But the unfortunate thing was England were consistently underperforming. So I think a decision to change the coach was a difficult one, but possibly the right one. Because hopefully a fresh impetus, new ideas. I think the inclusion of Kevin Sinfield is a really, really exciting prospect for the England team.
Yeah.
Knowing that the person that he is and the style that he coaches, I think he works on more on the passion side of the game, but with a good technical knowledge. I think Borthwick has he's like he work on the mind, and and technique, particularly forward play, obviously. But I think Sinfield will work on the heart, and the passion as well as a technical side of the game. So I am actually quite looking forward to it. I know that it is only 9 months to a World Cup, but I think they do have the skills to turn around what's not been a very successful team over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think I had a similar opinion. I feel like Eddie Jones, when he came in, he gave that fresh impetus. We sort of had quite a quick turnaround in from a reasonably poor 2015 to a pretty good Six Nations. Um, and I'm hoping that it has a similar sort of almost honeymoon period
Mm.
of Steve Borthwick coming in, especially with Kevin Sinfield. That's like really, I think that's a really good appointment. I'm also not so sure about the Steve Borthwick appointment, but I feel like the background staff seem to be good, and he's saying the right things at the moment. I just looked at it from last year. The tickets came out for the Rugby World Cup. I looked at it. England were playing badly, and I kind of just went, I'm not going to put my money down to see them in the latter stages or even bother with the group stages. But now I'm looking at it going, have I made a mistake? Could they actually do something at the next World Cup? Um,
I mean,
Usually
they
I would put my
could.
money down.
I mean, I think the thing to remember is they're not a million miles off the pace. We're only talking, maybe 5-10% at top level. But at top level, that's enough to see the separation of the top teams.
Yeah.
There are a whole bunch of teams in the mix: England, Australia, Wales, Scotland, Japan, Argentina, who are all capable of
Excuse
producing
me.
good games. And we've got a favourable draw on this side on our side of the pools, so you could do it. Yeah, we'll just have to see. I mean, my understanding was that Borthwick was coming in June anyway, so as part of the transition onto him after the World Cup. So they've only brought that forward by a bit. We will see what happens. I'm fingers crossed. I think I agree with you on the Kevin Sinfield thing. We'll bring a lot to it. I think these days it's not so much about the head coach; it's about the team you have around you that fill in the gaps, fill in the details.
Yeah, if you look at the way Leicester were playing when Steve took over, they were playing okay. They were doing reasonably well. They weren't doing overly well. And after the appointment of Kevin Sinfield, their style of play changed and they became really, really successful. So I'm looking at that thinking, what has Kevin Sinfield given them that's changed their fortunes? So that's why I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
him being involved in the England side. What is that? What's that? That thing that he brought to the Leicester side that made them, it's the top games they're won on small margins. And what was that small margin that he brought to that side that made them from a reasonable team to a very good team?
I also
And
like it.
hopefully he can bring that to England.
Yeah, hopefully. I also like it from the point of view that I feel like they're both coming from the same place. So they should have a vision and they should have a way of playing that will be aligned. It's a bit like I think early on in the Eddie Jones sort of time, the Saracens were so strong and they had this what was it, the Wolf Pack defense
Yeah.
system, and they sort of brought that in. They were like, well, half our players are Sarries players. Let's adopt the system, and they had a vision for it. And since that sort of Saracens breakdown, almost like Eddie Jones's fortunes to kind of have had that breakdown a bit. So it's nice
Yeah, but
for a coach and his assistant to come in with a new vision that's aligned.
that's a really interesting point, because if you look at Ireland, Leinster are making up the backbone of that squad.
Yeah.
and they play the lengths away, and you can see that, and that's really, and the same with the French clubs. The top French clubs are forming the backbone of that French team, and so they've got a style of play that they know and understand. And I think Eddie Jones has tried to combine styles. I mean, also as a Harlequins fan, huge fan of Marcus Smith. I think he has massive amounts to offer, but he plays a different way to the way,
Yeah,
say, for example, Saracens play. Both are champions, both successful. I think you need to find a style of play that everyone buys into. Always going back to this idea of what is England's rugby DNA? How do England play the game?
Yeah,
South Africa are going to be dominant, physical, set piece. It's the pride and passion. New Zealand are going to run it. You move the ball around. How do England play the game?
yeah. It shouldn't be about having individual great players. You should have. You should still have individual great players, but you want players who work well together,
Yeah,
who can create things, who can take things forward. I'm of the opinion that Marcus and um, Farrell
Farrell.
together
Yeah,
isn't. It kind of, I think they stifle each other because of the way they play.
yeah.
And Marcus needs a little bit more freedom to use the players outside him. Where if he's got Farrell outside him, that doesn't give him the freedom to do what he wants to do. I don't think.
Well, I mean, interestingly for me, thinking back to that New Zealand game from the Autumn Nations, in that last 10 minutes when Farrell picked up an injury and Marcus Smith got the freedom to run it,
Yeah,
we saw some exciting stuff. But what I found really interesting was I've been a little bit critical of Ben Young. So I think he's a fantastic player, done brilliantly for England, but I just feel that his time is coming to an end. And yet, he and Marcus combined superbly
yeah,
well. It's the best I've seen him play for a while. It's almost
yeah,
as though he had the shackles taken off, and he got to show all the brilliance that he can do.
yeah,
yeah.
And I think I want to see that happen. And I think I would rather prefer to play Owen Farrell at 10 or Marcus at 10.
yeah.
I
I
mean, what a
They
don't
do
think
play
together.
combination!
different games.
What a
Yeah.
combination of Marcus Smith or Owen Farrell playing 50, 60 minutes and then having 20 minutes of the other one come
Well,
on.
I mean, you offer a different style of a game, a more controlled game from Owen Farrell. Proven winner, proven leader.
Yeah,
And yet, if you want something more, a mix up, change up, more dynamic, Marcus Smith's your man.
yeah.
Yeah.
They're both very good players at their own particular style.
100%.
Um, but then I don't think the way they've been put together is conducive to the way to make England play well.
Yeah, I
That's
would
what
agree with that.
hopefully new coaches will come in and they'll have a way of playing. Even if they do go with the same system, if they sort of give them the roles and have a vision for how they should play. Because I feel like at the moment it's a bit too much like Marcus do your thing, Farrell do your thing, and it's just not working. Whereas
Yeah,
it might be
he's
that
Yeah,
thinking. I think he was thinking that because they're such both good players, that they would be able to play together and combine their skills to create a way of going forward,
yeah.
which didn't
But
quite work.
I was thinking back to last year's Autumn Nations when England played South Africa and they nicked it at the end. And you had Marcus at 10, you had Slade at 12 and Marchant at
Yeah,
13. It worked. You had that creativity and sleight of hand from Henry Slade, tied in really well with Marcus Smith. And you just got it worked. And I was excited to see where that went.
yeah. I'd have liked to have seen Tuilangi outside Marcus. Marcus putting him in space
Yeah, well
because
that would
if
mimic.
he hits an arm, he's through.
Well, it mimics, Esther Hazen at Harlequins,
Yeah,
having that absolute unit
yeah,
to wreck people.
yeah. That strong runner. Then if you've got somebody running a pace off that again,
Yeah,
they've got at least they've probably if he's not doesn't break through or they get a tackle on him, an offload to somebody coming through at pace. The opposition can't see where that's coming from because they're hitting the line at pace. They don't know where the
100%.
attack's coming from, and I
Yep.
think that would be a So I'm not sure who I would have outside somebody like Tuolangi, but probably maybe somebody like Marchant.
Yeah, I mean, Marchant was Slade with my choice.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I was
But
thinking
ultimately,
Slade.
and
I think if you're going to put someone like Slade outside him, Tuolangi has to be prepared to shift the ball, or you use Tuolangi as that sort of dummy runner, and the ball goes out the back to Slade, and then with pace on the wings, you can do something. But that's down to the coach to figure out. That's down
Yeah,
to
yeah,
work out the style of play,
it's going to be
how
an
he wants to do it.
interesting. It's going to be an interesting
yeah,
Six
but
Nations.
and wing position. Somebody I'd love to see Tom Roebuck or Radwan.
Yeah, I
Roebuck's
mean,
been absolutely stellar for Sale.
he has. I think this has been. I think this is where I've got frustrated with Eddie Jones personally. Is
Yeah,
he's
he
brought
stayed with his
players,
favourites.
but he's brought players into the training squad. And I'm going
Yeah,
to go back to Harlequins and use
yeah,
Caden Murley as an example.
yeah,
He brought him in for all the Autumn Nation stuff. He's on form. He's on fire. Give him a run out.
yeah. Give
See
players
what
who are on
see
form.
what he's got.
Yeah, exactly.
Can he hack it at top level? Let's find out.
Yeah,
Yep.
Rather than stay with players who
yeah, because
we know.
he's gone for
Well,
the results. He's tried to go for keeping the win.
yeah, the
His
thing is,
safety going for
yeah,
the win instead of actually going for that. Being brave
we
and going
yeah,
for the win with somebody's one form and is a bit more exciting.
but we know Johnny May's a good player. We know Jack Now's a good player.
Yeah,
We've seen what they can deliver. Who's next up? Who offers something
yeah,
else? And I think Radwan's been overlooked hugely on that front. That
yeah,
sheer pace is mental. I mean, you see what happens when Chelsea and Colby and Pimpy get the ball,
yeah,
or Will Jordan, just someone with absolute pace. Just Louis Sam for Wales,
yeah,
terrorising defences.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with what you've been saying. Hopefully, the Six Nations will be a real learning curve for what we are going to see from England. I'm fascinated. I'm going to all
Have
three
you?
games now.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. What's your prediction for Six Nations?
I'm going to call. I'm going to be a bit positive, but not overly so. I'm going to call second place to Ireland to win it. Yeah, I think
Okay,
we might beat France. I think France might have a bit of a pre-World Cup.
yeah,
But
because we got France. We
I'm
got
still calling France to win the World Cup though. That's
interesting.
yeah.
What do you
yeah.
reckon, Paul?
I called it 4 years ago, and
I
I'm
was
sticking
actually
by
going
it.
to go for France to edge the Six Nations over Ireland, so long as they have the right heads on, because we all know how the French can be. When they've got it, when the heads are on it, they are sublime. When the heads aren't on it, it's that Gallic temperament that, oh, isn't it? It can be mesmerising or it can be awful.
Yeah,
I think they've got a lot more consistent in recent years.
Yeah,
But I know what you mean.
definitely. I completely agree. But they still have that. They're still Gallic. They still have that temperament.
Yeah,
yeah,
I think for me, I think Ireland will edge the Six Nations because I think France travel to Ireland. I think that'll make a
yeah. I believe
difference.
so. Yeah,
They've also got
Um,
to keep Sexton fit.
yeah, and so I get England. I think it'll be Ireland, France, England.
sounds
We'll see.
fair. No,
We'll
I'm
see.
still. The reason I'm going France for the World Cup though is that home turf. So similar reasoning why you're going with Ireland for the Six
Yeah,
Nations.
yeah.
It's
I think home advantage is massive,
Yeah,
yeah,
and I mean, looking back at the French stadiums and the crowd and the atmosphere,
yeah.
that's huge,
That'll definitely
absolutely
fuel
huge.
the Gallic temperament.
yeah.
I
What
mean,
about
it's everything not
Wales?
having.
What about Wales with Gatland coming in?
God,
I
no,
think he possibly will inspire a little, but at the moment, I just don't think that they're at the races, so to speak.
I think Wales have deeper problems
Yeah,
with the setup in the provinces. I mean, Gatland will lift them because he has the confidence of the players. He's a proven coach. They love him, they know him, they trust him,
yeah,
and you'll see players respond to him. Um, and they'll get better and they'll improve. I mean, Six Nations is going to be fascinating for that game
yeah.
because
Because it also
England
you got
travel to
to think
Wales.
about go, Finn Russell for Scotland being back in the side.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stories out there that it's not clear cut. I mean, England have lost to Scotland twice now.
Yeah,
Mm,
Um, it's I think home advantage is more important than ever. But
yeah. If
yeah,
you definitely for us,
Gatland is a huge boost for Wales. Um, I don't think they'll be contenders at the World Cup, but they'll certainly get better.
yeah,
yeah, no, I think so. I was worried that with Pivac in charge, could Wales get the wooden spoon? Was what I was thinking. I don't think that will happen now. Um, but
But I mean,
yeah,
would Wales have lost those games to Georgia, Australia, Italy, with Gatland in charge?
yeah.
exactly. That's what I
And
was. That was
No,
my thought
no.
process. Yeah,
I think we're doing a little bit of a disservice to Italy here as well because they have played
Oh,
reasonably well.
they're absolutely playing better without question.
Yeah,
And that's fantastic to see.
yeah,
I just think Pivac has not got the best out of Wales.
no,
yeah. So now we're just going to talk a bit about the new rule changes that were introduced a couple of days ago. It seems like most of it is aimed at speeding up the game, stopping those sort of stoppages that frustrate us all when we're in the crowd so much, and just generally increasing the pace. So I don't know what people think about them. I think just for a summary, in case you haven't seen it, basically the rules are you've got 30 seconds to get ready to set for a scrum. The kicker only has 60 seconds now. You're not allowed water carriers except for after tries. And there's new tackle rules where they're lowering the height of the tackles. Um, so, yeah, those are the basic premises. What do you guys think of it?
Positive mainly. Game needs to be
yeah,
quicker. Stop start is killing it for spectators. Scrums just need to be quicker, better, and done. It's too long.
I've got to say also
Um,
one of those as well. They're uh, stricter penalty, like free kicks for lineouts that take too long to form. So I think
yeah,
that's
absolutely. The whole game needs to be faster. Um, I would still love them to address feed at scrum. The scrum should be contestable. Right now, you just feed it to your second row,
yeah.
yeah,
which is I think is crazy.
yeah. And they're doing that to again speed the game, but it's frustrating for the true fan, I think, because it's not a contest anymore.
Well, hookers don't hook.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I think that I'd love to see that change, but I'm all for speeding up the game.
Yeah. We actually had an interesting chat with Wayne Barnes last year, didn't we? We asked him about that, feeding it
Yeah,
in, and he was kind of the opinion that you've got to go with the sort of almost the casual fan of like they don't want to see a slow game. You're going to attract people to the game. They want to see fast
Yeah.
action, and by having
So he
having
was
the scrums
justifying
taking
the
so long,
money.
yeah, he was sort of the opinion that you kind of need to have that to speed up the game. So if any of these other things can actually speed up the game, hopefully maybe we can get back to a situation
Well,
where we
the
could
thing
have
is though,
contested scrums. But,
if a ball's put in straight and a hooker has got the skill, it would be quick.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you rewind it back to when scrums were generally put in straight, you won your own scrum probably 90-95% of the time.
Yeah, there was
Because
that
of because
chance
of,
that, but
there's always that slight chance, but on the
yeah,
whole, you were going to win it. So I disagree with that statement that it slows the game down.
yeah,
I think what slows the game down is when the scrum takes ages to form and collapses,
yeah,
and we can spend 5 minutes trying to get a scrum to work.
Yeah.
Just no.
This is why I get Wayne Barnes tweeting me saying that's not what I said. the Yeah, but I know I agree. I think the main bit is just that constant like taking forever to set up, then collapsing, then setting up again, then collapsing, then and that's partly a power thing. Like back in the day, I don't feel like it was such a power game because you had the hooker who hooked. Now it's more like put it into the second row, pound it through, and like you're good to go.
Well, the thing is, there's so much about that pre-engage is if you're off balance by just a little bit,
Mm,
that scrum's going down and you're being penalised.
yeah,
So you're trying to hold your position, your body weight, your angle, so that you're always putting your opponent on the back foot. But then it takes so long for it to happen. And then because
yeah,
there's so much going on in the front row, more than I think a
yeah.
single
A
referee
lot, a
can
lot of the
spot.
refs just don't understand whose fault it was. They do get
Well,
it right sometimes.
unless you're on the right angle, it can be really hard to see. And
Yeah,
I think this is where the game does suffer. In that, unless you've got an experienced prop commenting, for example, I love it when David Flatman commentates because he's able to explain why the scrum collapsed. I played second row, so I've got a good insight into what's going on back there. But the front row is like, yeah, I don't know the details, and so your casual fans not going to understand why it's going down, why it's collapsing.
yeah, and props getting blamed for it to going down when it was actually caused by the opposition prop, but he's played a blinder and got the
Yeah,
penalty.
for sure. So I
it's all
think you
part
need
of the
to make
dark arts,
scrums.
though, isn't it?
Exactly, mate.
It, yeah, it is, but I think if you're looking at creating a product or a
Yeah,
game that is better, because I think the big thing that worries world rugby right now is rugby's not growing
Yeah,
as a sport. And so how do you make that sport, our sport, more attractive and more interesting? And I think you've got to look at how you address the scrums.
yeah, and while making it safe,
yeah,
Oh yeah.
so that they can encourage children into the game to play the game because
I
their
mean,
parents are not scared of their children getting
player.
injured.
I mean, it's always ironic because we all had our injuries playing rugby,
yeah,
but player safety has to be the top thing. It just has to
yeah,
be. Otherwise, why would you put your kid in a game where they're going to come out with injuries? I mean, how many old rugby players do you know who are carrying a massive slew of injuries?
yeah. That's actually one of the things I want to do on a separate podcast on is like the state of injuries in the game, but also the school game, the future for it, and yeah, what we as injured people think about the future, but especially you, Ross, who've got children.
Yeah, yeah.
But like thinking of the future, possibly myself, would I put my kids into the game? So I think let's do a whole separate podcast because that could go
Gotta
on
say,
for
yeah,
a long
that's a
time. That
big
discussion.
topic, and I've got lots to offer on that topic.
Yeah,
But I do think that segues nicely into tackle height,
yeah,
which they're bringing in, and I think that's a positive thing. In
yeah,
that, for me, players I've mentioned in the past that I think have really good tackle technique are Sam Underhill and Courtney Laws. Courtney Laws in particular is a big unit, 6'6", I think, and yet he gets low every single time and makes that
yeah,
great tackle, and there's never a hint of a card or danger. So it's
yeah,
absolutely possible, and at 6'6", he can get low. People can get low. So I think if you're introducing a more fixed point of tackles at sternum height, it's easier to coach players. This is where you tackle, and then
yeah,
we're
yeah,
avoiding that head-on-head clash. Because right now, the way the rules are written or the laws are written, if you make contact with the head, it's a yellow or red.
I think
And whilst
it's
that's
I think it's positive as well. Just generally, when I grew up playing rugby, the first thing you were taught is this is where you tackle low. But then you're watching the professionals, and they're not tackling how you're being taught. And then you also, as you're getting up through the age grades, you're almost being taught you got to get a bit higher, otherwise you're not going to be able to stop them.
Well, it comes from the
It's
idea of offloading out of tackle. So
yeah,
if you tackle higher, you stop the offload out of tackle. Get that? Absolutely valid. But if you tackle high, you're going to run the risk of contact,
yeah,
which puts player safety.
Yeah.
yeah. But then that's why it just needs to be mandated. Like, and
Hundred
frankly,
percent.
also not only does it add to safety, but hopefully you'll get more offloads. Actually,
Well, yeah, absolutely.
for a casual viewer, that's great to see. Offloads are fantastic to watch if they're
I
done
mean,
well.
I think the reason why they've brought it in is because you're still seeing a lot of yellow and red cards in a match.
Yeah,
Almost every match will have one or two yellows or a red, which is not fantastic for the game because you want players on the pitch playing, you want the rugby
yeah,
flowing. So this helps players on where they should be tackling, and more importantly, it helps the coaching of players at all levels. So this is where you tackle, and I think
yeah,
that's a
yeah.
good thing.
Oh, I think so. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I think bringing the height down a little bit should hopefully encourage the correct techniques. They should be taught they should be training the correct techniques anyway.
Yeah, but then if you're training the correct techniques, if the rules allow you to stop the offload, and you're a coach and you're trying to get those marginal gains, you're going to be teaching that, aren't you? So
Well, I mean,
it's
also,
Yeah.
needed.
quite a few teams do still successfully employ the choke tackle. Keep the player
Yeah,
upright, force them all, force the turnover. But if you're putting player safety at risk, then you run the risk.
Yeah.
yeah. The rule I was surprised not to see, talking of safety, and again, this was one of the ones I was going to bring up in the other podcast session, is there's a lot of talk about the jackal going in over the ruck to snatch the ball away, and the risk that puts somebody at, like head collisions and shoulder injuries, all sorts of things, back injuries as they're going, like people will be running into the ruck right into your back and neck area. I'm surprised
Which
they've
is
not
why they
kind of looked at that a bit more yet in terms of these rule changes.
Yeah, it's tricky because I like the jackal. I like the contest for the ball. It
Yeah,
generates turnover.
yeah
It forces you to be smart and be aware. But if you're effectively, jackknifed over a player, your head and neck, you can't get low. You
yeah,
can't clear that player out without making head contact. So what do
yeah
you do?
yeah.
I
It's a
don't have
difficult
an
one.
answer to that.
I think they probably will look into it at some point. I also worry that if you take away the jackal, there's going to be sort of other consequences of that. People just charging into rucks. Also, like people just not contesting, and then ends up with more
Yeah.
bigger collisions outside of the ruck. Um, all sorts of things. So I think they need to be careful about that one. But I was surprised to not see even a mention of it. Um,
Well, probably because
the
I don't
latest
think
thing.
they have an answer.
Yeah,
There's not really a solution to it. I think the thing that surprised me, I don't know if you guys saw it, it was the video of Werner Koch, and he suplexed the guy.
yeah
It was like genuinely
yeah
hilarious.
he flipped him,
He's
didn't he?
just suplexed the guy, got a wrestling move out of of the clear out, and I mean, it's obviously if he was very sorry, apologised, got a yellow card, but it's like you can't do that. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
that's quite dangerous.
yeah. I might have to look that one up. I've not seen that yet.
Oh, it's
I've
just
not
it
seen
kind of
it, but I've seen about it.
it
Yeah,
happens so fast. You almost have to play it back and go, "Did he just do that?" And it's like fair play to him because that's not an easy thing to do, but it's not safe.
But
yeah.
I think he may have picked that up due to because they do so much wrestling training now
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the contact area.
Yeah.
That's possibly where that's come from.
Yeah. Overall, in my opinion, though, these rules are good. They should hopefully make the game more attractive for us in general, but also just people like, I don't know, just thinking like my mum who watches at most the Six Nations and England games, um, enjoys it but doesn't necessarily understand every in and out of the
Yeah,
game. She's going to be watching it thinking, oh, this is a much faster, less stoppages, less what's going on now moments. So I think hopefully it'll attract more people to actually enjoy it. Um,
definitely. And the
Yeah,
yeah,
thing is, for
anything that's
me,
positive, you know,
I
should be
think
good for the game.
you've got to consider if you're paying a lot of money to go to Twickenham to watch a rugby game, you want to hear something of a good game.
yeah, yeah,
You want it to be enjoyable.
definitely. Yeah, so the rule changes we all agree seem to be a good move. We obviously need good people in charge to enforce those rules. And recently, there's been some pretty negative news about stuff aimed at referees. They're an important, integral part of the game, but news recently came out about Wayne Barnes and the treatment he received online after the Razzie Erasmus comments about refereeing and particularly Wayne Barnes's refereeing performance against South Africa. I believe it was France, South Africa, but I might be wrong in that one.
I think so. I think
Um,
that's the one.
yeah, it led to people online giving him death threats, his family, and his wife and children, death threats, and I think threats about sexual violence. And it almost led to him quitting the game, in his own words, at one point. So yeah, what do you guys think? In my opinion, it's abhorrent, and like yeah, I've always really respected referees in every sport. I think they're in a tough position. I'd just be interested to hear what you think about it all.
I think it's a bit of a no-brainer, and that it's absolutely unacceptable. You know, just the abuse directed the referees is something that we've been lucky enough to keep out of our game, and we should never let it back in. Let alone going down the road where you're doing such insane things that are absolutely horrible and breaking the law. It just can't happen. I think the bigger thing you have to look at is how the actions of people in rugby influence social media. And this is not limited to rugby, this is a bigger topic. But if you're a really well known person with a big presence, like Razzie Erasmus, big following, if you lead with that kind of process of criticizing referees, putting videos out, you are setting the example and the standard for other people to do the same or worse. You
Yeah,
then can't stand back and say, oh, it's not my fault. I'm not responsible for these people's actions. But you are directly influencing what people do. So although you're not legally responsible, you're morally responsible. And I think World Rugby needs to get on this as fast as they can, or else we're going to get to a position where it becomes acceptable to criticise referees on social media and what have you. And listen, we all disagree with referee decisions.
yeah,
That's fine. That's part of it. But we never attack the referee.
yeah. I
That's
know
just a
for
big no-no.
I know for one, I've put stuff about refereeing decisions and stuff on Twitter in the past. I'd probably think twice about it now, but I've always been careful not to be like, it's the ref's fault. I've always been like, this decision I didn't necessarily agree with. Um, but I've always tried to do it in a
That's
way that
yeah.
doesn't point. But even now, I might be thinking, do I put that? But yeah, I definitely
Well, I
agree
mean,
that it's that there's people coming from the top. You can't have people at the top criticizing referees. Yes, they can say the odd comment about like didn't yeah that decision maybe didn't go against us or wasn't right. But yeah, it's almost becoming a free for all from people within the game to attack the referee. A bit like,
yeah.
unfortunately,
Well, I mean,
I don't want to mention other sports, but football has had this problem for years, and it's almost becoming more so with the social media
it's
influence.
because social media is biggest problem is allows you to do something anonymously
Yeah.
without repercussions. So you can say stuff you would never say in person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Now, obviously, you can't control everybody's actions, but you can set standards and call it out when you see it. What and it's, I mean, I watched the interview on the Good, the Bad, and the Rugby podcast. Um, and it's shocking when you hear what was said to, or social media put to Wayne Barnes and his family, his wife and children. It's nuts.
Yeah.
It's absolutely nuts, and we have to look after our referees. Really pleased to see they've formed a refereeing union now to give them more power collectively and to look after each other and support each other. Because obviously, if you've been the victim of social media abuse, that puts a massive mental strain on you. And so you've got to look after it. And the fact they had to cancel what should have been a celebration of an international referee refereeing 100 games, and in my humble opinion, one of the best referees out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can't cancel it because we've had social media death threats. So
Yeah.
we've had to cancel it. It's
Yeah. I was at
mental.
that game, and I was very sad to hear that it was not going ahead. Like, I was thinking, oh, it's great to see, like, the recognition, 100 caps. So for that
Yeah.
to not go ahead was quite sad for me. But then I heard that there was apparently some abuse because of the, the 100 caps thing not going ahead. But also about the
Thing is
fact that
though,
he was having recognition. Um,
well,
yeah, so
you should recognise it. I
yeah.
mean, the thing is, I look at Wayne Barnes, I look at Nigel Owens, and I look at Luke Pearce and other top refs who maintain an excellent dialogue with
Mm,
players, are very clear in what they're doing. There's a whole process in place after a game for coaches to discuss, calls that happened. And famously, Wayne Barnes openly admitted 2007 World Cup, that forward pass, France, New Zealand, he got it wrong. Still gets some stick for it.
mm,
But,
yep.
you know, referees are human. They make errors. Players are
Yeah,
human. They make errors.
he's man enough to admit that he was wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. We,
No one's
as said
covering it
earlier,
up.
yeah, as said earlier, we were lucky enough to have a Zoom chat with him like last year,
Yeah.
and yeah, he comes across as very humble and very likable man.
He's a very switched on guy.
Yeah, and he knows his own flaws. I don't think he needs other
Yeah.
people to point those
No.
out. So yeah, it's a real
But
shame. But
what I found fascinating was when he explained the process that they go through as professional referees.
yeah,
When literally they're sitting down after the game, they're talking through decisions, they're analysing what they've done, they're getting
Yeah,
feedback.
they do constantly analyse what they're doing to make
You
yeah,
sure
know,
they're getting the right call.
and getting
and
feedback from each other.
that ongoing process of that reflect and review is why I think we're seeing so many good referees at top level.
Yeah, I think people will be shocked at the amount of analysis that goes on by
Yeah,
themselves, and on their own performances and performances of other referees,
Yeah,
to get those big decisions right, because they want to get those big decisions right, and they endeavour to do that, but they're human, and sometimes things do go awry, and it's unfortunate, but it's a part and parcel of
yeah.
sport.
yeah,
Well, I mean, something that was said to me when I was competing was, until you play the perfect game, you can't really say to a referee you've not had a good game.
yeah, yeah.
And as a player, you're never going to play the perfect game. As a referee, is give it the absolute best.
Yeah, and you
And
can disagree with the referee. You don't have to
of course,
agree with his decision, but you respect him for being there and making that decision.
yeah, absolutely. And the
I
thing
also
is, like,
come.
even yeah, sorry,
No, you go first, and I'll carry on. You
I'll
say what you
say
want to say.
right. I'm going to flick back to I think it was Australia. When Australia, no, sorry, it was New Zealand in the Autumn Nations. I think Cowan Dickey gets that weird scrum, or I guess that weird try between his legs. I think it was Cameron Dickey. No, sorry, was it Will Hurd? He
Oh, I
scored
couldn't
two
tell you, to
tries,
be
and
honest.
second try,
Oh, the prop.
second the prop, yeah. So Will Stewart, sorry,
Will
the
Stewart,
second
yeah.
try, second try kind of squeezes his legs, and it's really unclear. Even after multiple looks at a TMO from multiple angles, there's still an element of doubt, and they had to go with the best judgment call.
Yeah.
And that was with reviewing it. And they reviewed it for a while.
Mm.
So even with the power of TV, things are still not clear.
Yeah.
What I was going to say before is that I grew up from about the age of 10 when my dad retired from the game. Never like professional level or anything. It was just sort of squaddy playing rugby. But he then went on to referee quite a lot of sort of club level games, that sort of thing. So I used to go along on my school holidays and watch him referee, and it's yeah, as a sort of 11, 12, 13 year old, it's kind of amazing the amount of abuse you see hurled at your father. Um,
Yeah,
Sometimes quite
it's
rightly, I'd
mad.
say. but
Was
but
was that rugby?
yeah, that was rugby referee.
See, that's really
And
interesting because growing up, I had the opposite in that it was drilled into us. You do not talk back to referee
yeah, what was
under any
interesting
circumstances.
after the game, there was never any abuse. It was always thanks, ref, great. Like I'm not talking from players. Players were generally respectful. It was the sidelines, the people watching on
Mm.
the sidelines chucking abuse, and it would also be amazing how they would often switch when they found out who I was, like as an 11, 12 year old, sat on the side of the pitch. Because a
Yeah,
few
yeah,
times people would go, "Not seen you here before. Who are you with?" And I'd be like, "The guy that you just called a wanker," and it would be like, it
yeah.
would be like, "Oh," and then nothing said for
But
the
then
rest of the
again,
game.
that highlights the point when if it's a blank faced referee you've never met before, in the same way social media, I don't have to see this person.
Yeah.
We will say
Yeah,
some pretty dark stuff. Yet when we know the person face to face, we feel embarrassed about it.
yeah, yeah.
So
It
I
was
think
definitely an interest. I used to go partly just for the interest of like, what's the
yeah.
vibe going to be like today? Sometimes it would be completely respectful. Like I would say, also interestingly, the women's games he refereed, although sometimes the game could be a bit more. Don't know what the right word is. Those were the games that were more likely to kick off. Actually, I would say, in terms of,
So
um, but on the sidelines, everyone was very respectful, and they were all very
so this is
like,
something
yeah,
that I've found very very interesting. Watching the Lionesses, win the Europeans, and getting a bit more onto women's football. I'm a big fan of women's rugby. We've got more onto women's football as well. And at women's rugby and women's football, there is zero hassle. There's no violence. There's no nonsense. It's a really good family atmosphere,
yeah, yeah. And that
and
wasn't what I
it's the
was. Yeah,
same game.
I was saying, yeah, it was a good. The women's game was always respectful. The players might have a go at each other. There might be hair pulling. There might be game cancellations at
Oh
times.
yeah,
I saw, but
but
but it was never
yeah, but
directed at the
listen,
referee.
player on
Whereas,
player is entirely different.
yeah,
Certainly, if you can get an edge on a player by winding them up, absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
If you can get away with a cheeky holds or that's part of the game. I player and player is entirely different.
yeah, yeah,
Referee is absolutely
out of
different
order.
level.
But yeah, I found it
Um,
interesting, and I feel like I saw a microcosm of what is going on with the Wayne Barnes thing now,
mm,
as my experience growing up. Um, I mean, I when I was playing, I was quite small, and I was kind of thinking, in a couple
you're
of
still
years, I
quite
might
small.
actually. Yeah, I am. I'm very small, but before my injury, I was kind of thinking. Well, firstly, I wanted to go away and play ice hockey, but then also I was thinking about training as a ref, and doing sort of
Yeah,
the ref coaching sort of side of things as well. Um, but it did sort of make me think, do I want to do that? Um, I think I would have done,
that raises
but
that raises a really interesting question, which is, refereeing should be easy to get into. It should be looked after. You should feel valued. It should be something that people want to do.
Yeah.
I also think a particular type of person it becomes a referee.
I think
You've got to have an interest to do it. It's not something you just
Yeah,
decide to do on a whim.
I think you have to have a real love of the detail. Like one of the
yeah,
things I used to do every year was take my dad's new refereeing guide with all the new rules in it and learn that inside out before playing the season, because I used to think it was like a great tool in my armory to be able to know the little rules that some of the refs didn't even know. So that was one of the reasons I was like, oh, I'd actually quite like to be a referee, because I loved that sort of detail side of knowing what should be going on in the game. So I think it does attract that side of things quite readily. So I think you're right. It does maybe attract a certain type, but I'd also argue that those certain type of people may not be the best people to deal
yeah,
with people hurling abuse.
Yeah, and that's why I think you need that support network around referees and officials, and that's why I think World Rugby need to really take the lead and make it very clear to
Yeah,
coaches, people within the game. These are the standards we
yeah,
expect,
and
and you
and
will be
you
sanctioned.
should not waver from that.
yeah, because
Yeah,
it
and
will
there will be
filter down as
sanctions.
well. It does
Of course,
filter
it does.
down. Um,
Well, I mean, if you look at other sports, if you see your idol, your player, losing their crap with the referee, you're going to follow. If the top player in the world does it, I can do it. So if one of the head coaches in the world, the head directors is doing it, why can't I?
yeah,
And that's where you've got to be absolutely on this.
yep. Right, I think we're probably out of time for today, so let's leave it there and just say to everyone, please don't abuse
Awesome.
referees.
No,
um,
please don't. Remember, referees are for life, not just for Christmas.
yeah, absolutely. And with that, I think we'll say goodbye from us. That was another episode of All Rocked Up. We'll be having another one hopefully in a couple of weeks' time. Hope everyone enjoys their Christmas break, and hope you enjoyed the podcast. Please share it widely if you liked it. Like it on social media. All of those things that really help us out. We're brand new. We're really trying to push this and get a bit of momentum behind it. Um, and yeah, hopefully see you all in the new year. And yeah, you liked and keep coming back. Goodbye from me.
Super. Bye
Goodbye.
for me.